My fiancé said, "I'm inviting my sugar daddy to the wedding. He's paying for my dress." I said, "Excuse me?" She explained she'd been seeing him just for money for 6 months. I replied, "Keep the dress." Then I ended the engagement and sent his wife the evidence. When both their marriages imploded, I, 28 male, am a software engineer, which basically means I spend my life looking for bugs in complex systems and fixing them. I live a pretty structured, logical life. My fiancée, 26 female, was the exact opposite. She is a freelance lifestyle influencer, which is essentially code for spending money we didn't really have to look like she was living a billionaire's life on the internet. We had been together for 3 years, and honestly, I thought we had a solid foundation. I make a very good living, so I was perfectly fine footing the bill for our life together, including 90% of our upcoming $50,000 wedding. I loved her, and I wanted her to have the dream day she was constantly putting on her vision boards. That was a massive mistake. The glitch in my perfectly planned life started about 3 weeks ago on a random Tuesday evening. We were deep in the weeds of wedding planning, and the budget was already getting stretched because she insisted on a venue that looked like a historic castle. She came home that night absolutely glowing, carrying a massive, heavy garment bag from a downtown bridal boutique where the starting price for a veil is more than my first car. I looked up from my laptop and asked if she had finally picked up the $4,000 dress we had agreed upon and budgeted for. She just smirked, unzipped the bag, and revealed this completely custom, hand-beaded lace monstrosity. She proudly announced that it was a $15,000 gown, but told me not to worry about the credit card statement because it was already fully paid for. I just sat there staring at her. I asked her who exactly paid for a $15,000 dress, knowing her parents absolutely could not afford it, and she had drained her own small savings on lavish bridesmaid proposal boxes months ago. She poured herself a glass of wine, didn't even blink, and casually said she was inviting a special guest to our wedding. She called him her sponsor. She explained, with zero shame, that he was a wealthy, older businessman she had been seeing for about 6 months. He was paying for the dress, her designer shoes, and had even offered to cover the premium open bar upgrade for our reception. I felt the blood drain from my face. I asked her if she was seriously telling me she was inviting her sugar daddy to our wedding. She actually got offended and snapped at me not to use that word. She called it a mentorship and a transactional relationship. She said she had been seeing him just for money to make sure our wedding was absolutely perfect. She looked me dead in the eye and said she did this for us so we wouldn't have to drain my savings. She expected me to just nod, smile, and let this guy sit in the front row while we exchanged vows because, in her twisted mind, it was a win-win. He got to feel young being seen with her at nice hotels, and she got the luxury lifestyle she felt she deserved. The absolute entitlement was staggering. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I told her in a very calm, level voice to keep the dress, but that the engagement was officially over and we were done. She literally laughed at me. It was this mocking, arrogant laugh. She told me I was being overly dramatic and that I was going to throw away a 3-year relationship and a $30,000 non-refundable venue deposit over a dress. She told me I needed her to keep my boring life interesting and that I'd be begging her to come back by morning when I realized I was going to be the guy who got dumped 2 months before his wedding. I didn't argue. I just walked into our bedroom, pulled out her ridiculously expensive suitcase, and started throwing her clothes into it. She stood in the doorway sipping her wine, telling me that if I canceled the wedding, I was legally responsible for the contracts since my name was the primary on everything. She thought she had me trapped financially. She forgot who she was dealing with. While she went into the bathroom to do her skincare routine, I grabbed her phone. She didn't even have a passcode on it because she thought I was too trusting to ever look. I found the guy immediately. He was saved in her contacts as executive consultant. The messages were not just a business transaction. They were incredibly graphic, detailed records of a 6-month affair. There were hotel room numbers, photos, and a whole conversation where she joked to him about how easy I was to manipulate and how boring I was in bed compared to him. But the absolute kicker was a text from him apologizing for missing a meetup because he had to take his wife out for their anniversary. I screen recorded the entire chat history, making sure to capture every photo, timestamp, and confession. I sent the file to a burner email address I created on the spot, then deleted the evidence of the transfer from her phone. When she came out of the bathroom, I told her she needed to leave for the night. She rolled her eyes, grabbed her bag, and said she'd just go stay at a luxury hotel that her sponsor would happily pay for. She told me to call her when I was ready to apologize. The second the door closed, I went to work. Finding the executive consultant took me about 20 minutes of basic online sleuthing. He was a very prominent real estate developer in our city, a guy who served on charity boards and built his whole public persona around family values. More importantly, I found his wife. She was a high-profile partner at a major corporate law firm. I drafted an email to her professional work address. The subject line was "Financial audit of your husband, wedding sponsorship." I attached the screen recording of the texts and the photos of my fiancé in the $15,000 dress he bought with their money. I wrote a short note explaining that her husband was financing my wedding, but since I was canceling the wedding due to his affair with my fiancé, I figured she would want the receipts for her own records, especially if they had an infidelity clause in their prenup. The next morning, my phone blew up. The sponsor called me from a blocked number, and he sounded like he was having a panic attack. The arrogant sugar daddy was gone. He was begging me to tell his wife it was a prank, that I was just a disgruntled former employee trying to extort him. When I told him I wasn't taking a dime from him, he switched to threats. He told me he knew people in the tech industry and could ruin my career, calling me a bug under his shoe. I just calmly informed him that his wife had already replied to my email thanking me for the evidence, and that she had filed an emergency motion to freeze their joint bank accounts at 8 a.m. I hung up on him while he was stammering. Not even an hour later, my ex-fiancée was pounding on my apartment door, absolutely hysterical. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was smeared, and the smug influencer attitude was completely gone. She was screaming that I ruined everything. The sponsor had called her, screaming that he was cutting her off because his wife had intercepted the boutique payment and canceled the dress order. The wife was also threatening to sue my ex for civil conspiracy to defraud marital assets. I opened the door, but I stood blocking the frame. I handed her a legally binding 30-day notice to quit that I had printed out. I told her she had a month to get the rest of her stuff out of my apartment, but that I had already changed the locks on my home office where my servers and valuables were. She started sobbing, trying to manipulate me, saying she only did it to give us a better financial start and that we could just scale down the wedding and fix things. I told her the only thing we were scaling up was my legal action. I demanded the engagement ring back. She crossed her arms and sneered, saying her lawyer would tell me it was a gift and she was keeping it to sell. I politely informed her that in our state, an engagement ring is legally considered a conditional gift based on the promise of marriage. Since she broke that promise by having a 6-month affair, the ring was legally mine. I told her if she didn't hand it over right then, I was adding a count of conversion to the civil suit I was drafting to recover the $12,000 in non-refundable vendor deposits I was out. She looked at me like I was a monster, ripped the $22,000 ring off her finger, threw it at my chest, and ran down the hallway crying. Later that week, I actually got a call from the sponsor's wife. She asked me to come down to her law firm. Sitting in her massive, glass-walled office, she didn't look like a heartbroken woman. She looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. She thanked me for the meticulous evidence and explained that her husband had been using a fake corporate consulting LLC to funnel their marital money to various young influencers, but my ex was by far the most expensive. She told me she was filing for divorce under the dissipation of marital assets doctrine, meaning she was legally entitled to claw back every single cent he spent on my ex: the dress, the hotels, the fancy dinners, the cash allowances. It totaled around $240,000 over the course of their mentorship. She asked if I would be willing to testify to the timeline of the affair to prove my ex was a willing participant in draining their marital funds. I agreed without hesitation. In return, the wife made a single phone call to the owner of my wedding venue, who happened to be a client of hers, and miraculously, my $30,000 non-refundable deposit was refunded to my account by Friday afternoon. Fast forward a few months to the actual depositions. The legal process is slow, but it is brutally thorough. We were all in a sterile conference room. The sponsor looked like he had aged 10 years. His tailored suit was baggy, and he wouldn't even make eye contact with my ex, who was sitting at the end of the table trying to look demure and innocent in a cheap blazer. The wife's attorney absolutely dismantled them. When my ex tried to claim the money was for legitimate marketing strategy meetings, the attorney pulled out credit card receipts for luxury lingerie and room service at 5-star hotels. My ex started crying looking at me, saying she did what she had to do to build her brand for our future. I just stared blankly at her. Then came the absolute nuke. The wife's attorney dropped a massive stack of bank statements on the table and revealed that the sponsor had exhausted his slush fund months ago. To keep up appearances and keep paying my ex's lavish allowance and the lease on her luxury car, he had started funneling money out of a secondary account. It was his 19-year-old daughter's college tuition fund. The room went completely dead. Even the sponsor's defense lawyer looked disgusted. I looked at my ex and asked her how it felt to drive a luxury car funded by a teenager's stolen education money. She completely broke down, screaming that the sponsor lied to her and told her he had millions. The sponsor finally snapped, stood up, and screamed at her that she was a parasite and a liability who cost him his entire life, before storming out of the room. After the deposition wrapped, my ex cornered me in the hallway. She had nothing left. The sponsor had dropped her, she had been formally evicted from my place, and she was facing a $250,000 lawsuit from the wife. She begged me to give her the engagement ring back so she could pawn it and hire a decent defense attorney. I smiled and told her I had already sold the ring months ago. I used part of the money to hire the private investigator who helped uncover the daughter's drained college fund, and I donated the rest to a local charity that supports victims of financial abuse. The look of pure, utter defeat on her face is something I will cherish for the rest of my life. The final fallout has been incredibly satisfying to watch unfold. Because the sponsor was using corporate accounts to fund his cheating, his firm was heavily audited by the IRS for tax evasion. He lost his house, his business, and his reputation in the city is completely destroyed. My ex tried to take the easy way out and file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy to escape the $240,000 she owed the wife. But under 11 U.S. Code Section 523, debts that come from willful and malicious injury or fraud cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. The judge ruled that her participation in the fake LLC scheme was fraudulent. She is legally shackled to that debt. Her influencer career completely imploded when the wife tipped off the dealership about the fraudulent funds, and the repo men came to tow her luxury car. My ex threw a massive tantrum in the street, the police were called, and a neighbor filmed her getting arrested for disorderly conduct. The video went viral. She now lives in a tiny, rundown studio apartment and works the register at a discount retail store to allow her wages to be garnished. I lost a little bit of money on the smaller wedding vendors, but my life is peaceful, quiet, and perfectly structured again. The entitlement of those two people was their ultimate downfall. They genuinely believed the rules didn't apply to them because they were rich or pretty. They thought they could manipulate the system however they wanted. But they forgot one basic rule of programming. Every single action leaves a log file, and eventually, the system corrects itself. If you want to read more stories where the boring, logical guy completely reboots the system and destroys the villains with their own data, make sure you hit that subscribe button. I guarantee the return on investment here is way better than a sugar daddy's stolen college fund.